Welcome to the Kingsburg Community Church podcast, Thinking About Faith. We pray that this podcast helps you deepen your faith in God and stir some inner thoughts about the Christian life.
Hi, everyone. This is Pastor Ed, and this is the KCC podcast, Thinking About Faith. We're glad that you joined us today, and I just pray that you'll get something out of this. I chose kind of a whimsical topic today. This is just one of those things. As we do this podcast, I think you're kind of getting a little we're pulling aside the curtain and looking into the brain of Pastor Ed. And I think what you're finding is I think about a lot of weird things in the course of a week or of a year. You know that KCC is closing in on 140 years old. So we've been here in Kingsburg for a long time. And that, I believe, influences something of a long-term perspective that we have here at KCC. There's a difference. If you're a farmer, there's a difference if you're between planting corn or planting trees that will be harvested in 40 years for lumber. At least the cornfield that I ride my bike past on Stroud Avenue, just outside of town, they plant corn twice a season. So it's very intense, but very short growing season. And when you're planting trees for lumber, it takes a long time for a tree to grow to maturity. And that time horizon makes a difference. At KCC, because we've been around for 140 years, we're looking to build a durable faith, durable friendships, and durable spiritual practices, building durable institutions here in our town and ways of living together, because we hope to be around for another 140 years. You know, I love church plants. I love to watch them. I'm glad I never was called to do church planting because it takes a lot of energy and it's high risk sort of stuff, but it's incredibly exciting. And when there's a new church planted, there's an unleash of such incredible excitement and energy. It's like watching a puppy. You know, dogs are great, but puppies are wonderful because they're just so full of energy. But a lot of church plants end up failing, and that would be the downside of church planting. All that energy is expended, but sometimes it comes to naught. So I'm kind of glad that my ministry career has been in established churches, and that this church has stood the test of time. I like the idea of building things in the kingdom of God that will far outlive me. And I actually, I'm kind of looking forward to the day when somebody looks at a plaque in our church. We've got this plaque that they did at must have been the 100th anniversary of our church. They did a plaque of all the pastors. And I look at those pastors' names and I thank God for most of them. But they're just names to me. And I kind of look forward to the day when my name on that plaque is just a name to somebody, because that means the church will still be here. You know, again, the sort of person I am and the sort of church we are, we try to resist Christian fads because we've seen so many of them. And what is it about biblical Christians in America in our time that we just love fads? Have you noticed that? We just love fads. I became a serious Christian in the 1970s, and that was the time of the Jesus movement, and Christian music, Christian rock and roll was a new thing. And Hal Lindsey had a series of end times books that I think I read them all. The Late Great Planet Earth. There's a new world coming. I can't remember all of them. But, there was this fascination about the end times. And I don't know if it was because of Vietnam and the civil rights movement and the unrest that was happening during those days. But people were living in the expectation that we were in the end of the end times and that Jesus was going to come in the clouds within 10 years. And because of that, there was incredible vibrancy and urgency to spreading the gospel that really was a beautiful thing. But of course, Jesus didn't come back in the 70s. And I don't know that anybody reads those books anymore. In the 80s, those were the days of the glory days of the Christian bookstore. Do you remember Christian bookstores? And Christian bookstores started becoming a big thing. They started out as just kind of a very small little shop with a couple of Bibles and, a couple of Billy Graham books or church history books or books on missionary biographies. And all of a sudden, the Christian bookstore became a Christian place to meet other Christians, a place to buy Christian music, a place to get Christian bestsellers that were some of them were biblical study stuff, some were theology, some were popular theology, but also some were Christian fiction started becoming a thing, and people started loving those. I remember some of the books that I read, and they were fascinating, and I remember wanting to, and I couldn't wait for the next one to come out in the series. And there was also Christian quiche in those bookstores. You could find decorations for your house. And remember, you could get a padded cover for your humongous Bible, because we all started carrying around study Bibles at church. And there was a friendly debate about what study Bible you should have. And everybody had a padded Bible cover because that way you could keep your highlighters, because you wanted to highlight, texts to remember. And you wanted to keep your notepad in there to take notes on the sermon. And, it was kind of a thing, and kind of went along with, I remember everybody was decorating in mauve and seafoam green. I mean, it was kind of a thing. And the women had big hair and padded shoulders. And, it just kind of was the style of the day. At the same time, charismatic Christianity was kind of having an explosion outside of its traditional base. The traditional base of Pentecostalism tended to be very small congregations with very low education and very low economic status. And it suddenly, charismatic belief and worship kind of emerged onto the global scene. And it started kind of having a moment and becoming mainstream. Then there was the 90s. You remember reading Tim LaHaye's Left Behind series, another wave of end-time fascinations. There was a guy named Frank Peretti who wrote novels about angels and demons. And all of a sudden, there was this fascination within the church about demons and where demons might be hiding, and the demons that might be afflicting your local church or your community, and how to hunt for demons and cast them out. And people went to the extreme of looking at things in society like Smurfs and Harry Potter books and things like that. And I can remember, our kids were young at the time. I can remember before our kids read Harry Potter books, my wife read Harry Potter books because she was just concerned, is this some sort of weird occult thing? And, after she read the first book, I remember her saying, I love that book. It was great. And so I remember, I couldn't wait until our kids finished reading the book because I wanted to read the book. You remember wearing WWJD bracelets? Everybody had that bracelet around their wrist. What would Jesus do? It was a great idea, but it was kind of a fad, right? Nobody wears WWJD bracelets anymore. For me, the Promise Keepers movement was wonderful while it lasted, but it didn't last. It called men to Christian leadership in their household, and it called Christian men to reconciliation, and particularly to racial reconciliation, which was a beautiful thing. and also to reconciliation among camps of different Christians. So I know that the founders got a lot of flack for welcoming Catholics to come to Promise Keepers. Many Catholics were suspicious and wouldn't come, but the ones who would come, they were welcomed. And I will never forget the Promise Keepers Pastors Gathering in Atlanta, where a Baptist president of Moody College and Jack Hayford, who was one of the stars of the charismatic mega church pastor, in front of 17,000 pastors, confessed the sin of hating and distrusting each other from their various theological standpoints, and asked forgiveness of the others for things done and said that were harmful in the years leading up to that. And it was a beautiful moment. Unfortunately, Promise Keepers didn't last. In the 2000s, there was the New Reformed movement, when a number of Calvinistic pastors got together, and many of them were young and vibrant and cool. They were writing books. They formed a thing called the Gospel Coalition that I think still exists, but doesn't have the big mojo anymore. There were a lot of mega churches that were going that way, and many people became neo-Calvinists. I remember, one of the young men who became a pastor from our congregation went to Reformed Seminary, Zach Dewey, because he was so excited by this New Reformed movement. In the 2010s, there was the emergent church movement. You may not have heard of it. It was a thing mostly of younger people, and they kind of, in some ways, they emerged out of that Reformed church. And unfortunately, what started out as an attempt to be more relevant and to be softer in engagement with the world, so as not to look at secular people as the enemy and to go to war with them, but to reach out and try to welcome them into churches. Unfortunately, much of that emergent movement ended up emerging from biblical Christianity into what looked to me like a new type of liberal church. It was very similar to the United Methodism that we had just escaped from. It just had a new coat of paint. Younger pastors that were cooler, who smoked and cussed, and churches didn't even have. Not only didn't they have pews, they didn't have chairs, they had couches. And it was kind of a thing that had a moment. It didn't last very long because, I think liberal theology just isn't robust enough to sustain faith in a 21st century world. Then, of course, there was COVID at the end of the 2010s and the beginning of the 2020s. Because we had to, the church went online during COVID. And late 2010s and through now, the title of evangelical, which was a title that I always used to label myself, and I claimed with pride, it was a title that was really came into prominent usage in the 40s, post-World War II America, and it stood for Billy Graham, Fuller Seminary, Christianity Today. It was an intellectually respectable, intellectually engaged biblical Christianity. So it was separate from fundamentalism, but also separate from liberal mainline theology. I loved being an evangelical. Well, I don't use that title anymore because the title is no longer useful. If you tell someone you're an evangelical, or if we say we're an evangelical church anymore, people who are not, well, even some people within the church are going to think that you're talking about a political label that has very little to do with the core basics of Christian belief. enshrined in the Apostles' Creed, in the Nicene Creed, and in the New Testament. So can't use that title anymore. When people ask what kind of Christian you are, I kind of mumble around a bit, and I've kind of unhappily settled on the title of biblical Christian, just because if you call yourself an Orthodox Christian, they think of Greek Orthodox and they wonder, where's your beard and your, cowl over your head, and think, and that's Eastern Orthodox. But Orthodox actually means, that which has been taught for all time. And so we are Orthodox in our theology, small o, not big. We're not Eastern Orthodox. But that just confuses people. So I just say, at KCC, we believe and teach the Bible. It's interesting, though, when I listed all of those fads that came and went, there were some things that changed in the last 50 years that have stuck, aren't there? The way we do church is vastly different than the way we did church when I was a kid. Notably, probably the biggest change is contemporary Christian music. Contemporary Christian music has pretty much displaced hymns, Christian hymnody, as the predominant use of Christian music in Christian worship in America today. So, are there places that still sing hymns? Well, we still sing hymns, and the choir will sing a hymn from time to time. They haven't gone away, but when was the last time you used a hymnal? Probably a long time ago, unless you went to a hymn sing. The predominant use of music in worship is contemporary Christian music. How about PowerPoint? Sermons, preaching has become more and more visual, and some pastors use video a lot more than we do in our worship service. But there are many more progressive churches, progressive as in more modern churches than us, that have video teams that are producing video for the sermon every single week. And it's just kind of a feature. It's not kind of a special thing anymore. We're a medium-sized church, so I guess we haven't gotten there yet. The move to mega churches seems to be going strong. Although it will be very interesting, right now in Christian history, legendary founders are either retiring or dying. You might have seen that John MacArthur at Grace Church down in Southern California passed away just a couple of weeks ago, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to that movement. Last summer, Gretchen and I went to Willow Creek Church in outside of Chicago, just because I'd seen it on TV at the Leadership Summit so many times, but I'd never been there. So went there, and we went to it was an early service, but it was remarkable how empty the parking lots were. This church is a mega church built for tens of thousands of people, and I don't know that the parking lot we were parked in was 10% full. There were still a lot of people in the main sanctuary, but it's much smaller now that the founding apostolic leader is no longer leading that church. So there's a question. Can what those leaders built in the mega churches be passed on to new leaders? My guess is that it's going to be 50-50. Some are going to continue to be able to not only pass the baton, but will grow even larger and stronger and more influential, but others will fall off. Do you remember the Crystal Cathedral in Garden Grove, just south of Disneyland? Crystal Cathedral, Robert Schuller was on TV every Sunday, and his hour of power was watched by millions of people. And when he retired, he tried to pass on the leadership of his church to his son. That didn't work very well. I think they tried to pass on leadership maybe to his daughter, and that didn't work any. But anyway, the Crystal Cathedral is no longer the Crystal Cathedral. It's now the cathedral that is the head of the diocese of the Catholic Church. I suppose it's of Orange County, but I don't know enough about Catholicism to know that. The Calvary Chapel movement, which was huge when I was growing up, that movement has plateaued. They really aren't planting very many new churches. Some of the older churches are shrinking and going away. So this is kind of an interesting moment to see how much of the megachurch movement is actually going to stick. Many of the great nationally known leaders of my day are already gone. And of course, it makes sense. I'm retired now. It does strike me that we love change for change's sakes because people love something new. And I've seen a lot of mistakes that were made in an effort where pastors wanted to change faster than a congregation was able to take. And so I know that there are refugees from other churches at KCC who ended up at KCC because we still play our organ. And for us, it's always been a both and with hymns and organs and contemporary rock bands. And, I know of a church in town where the pastor literally cut the organ console up with a chainsaw, removed it from the sanctuary, cut it up into little pieces, threw it in a dumpster because he wanted to signal that those days of that music are over. I think that was a bit unsensitive, and I know that there were people who were hurt by that. Change can be difficult, and so you need to be sensitive about the pace of change. Change is inevitable, so we have to change. So, I'm not one of those people who have a lot of sympathy by people who want to keep worship the same as it was 30 years ago. It's unrealistic, and we want to reach people in today's world who are not being reached. But the question rises, how can you tell what's a fad and what is wise progress to communicating the gospel in a way that is better for people? Now, obviously, it's not an either or. Some of those fads left lasting good in lives of believers. I don't read end times books anymore. Frankly, I'm not very interested in the end times, but that sparked in me, as a young person, a college student, a passion for going deeper with Christ that is still a part of me today. So fads aren't terribly harmful unless they are harmful. And there are some fads that I wish we would maybe rethink. Personally, I wonder if multi-site churches are a fad. I could be wrong, but I'm just, there for a time, very successful churches would multiply themselves and have 4 or 5 or 6 different campuses. Made sense. Why try to build an accommodation for 20,000 people when you can have 20 places for 1,000 people each and expand your reach? Many of these churches, they would do video cast of the sermons, have a worship band at every site, but video cast a prominent preacher to each site every Sunday and have a site pastor. I noticed that many of the multi-site churches 10 years later are unwinding the multi-site, and they're just launching the satellite churches as independent churches or maybe allied churches, but no longer do they do the videotape of the sermon instead, because people can watch a videotape of a sermon at home. They have the site pastor now being the lead pastor of that site. We'll see. I know that one of the churches here in Kingsburg just became a satellite church of a church in Clovis. And I know one of the formerly prominent churches in Selma is becoming a satellite church. Oh, I was wrong. The Selma church is the one that's being a satellite church of the church in Clovis. and the church here in Kingsburg is becoming a satellite of a church in Visalia. And so we'll see how long that lasts. I think personally, not a prophet, but I think it's a fad. Okay, so is there a lesson in here for us? Or are you just telling us something interesting about churches? Well, I think the lesson is, let's not be a fad church. Let's try to stick to things that last the test of time. Let's particularly not be early adopters of the latest, greatest new things. The amount of money that churches sink into video walls and into electronics to make their platform look like a reality TV show. If it sticks, in 20 years, maybe Kevin will have to buy a video wall for us. But let's wait on that and not spend $100,000 on that and give the $100,000 to missions instead. Other things, if there's a movement like a Promise Keepers or something like that rises, maybe we could rise that, because studying the Bible is always a good thing. But let's be judicious about that. I guess there's a balance between the word and the gospel, which never change, and our need to find new means and voices and modalities to communicate the word and the gospel. But let's keep in mind that in Hebrews 13:8, the Bible says Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And we escaped a Methodist denomination that, in its haste to be relevant, said we can't believe in miracles or resurrection in a modern world. And so because of that, they shipwrecked their faith. And I would say that what remains of the United Methodist Church, the majority of it is sub-Christian. That's a harsh thing to say, but the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed and the New Testament back me up in saying that they've become sub-Christian. So let's never do that. Let's keep the gospel. But at the same way, if there's a way to reach generations yet unborn that we're not doing, by all means, by all methods, let's find a way to reach the many. And, if that means bigger video screens, if that means, something that we haven't tried before. I'm not going to promise that I'm going to like it because I'm an old dude, but I will support it if it reaches more people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's all about reaching the lost here in Kingsburg and around the world and encouraging people to go deeper in faith. Let's not be fad Christians. We're here for the long run. So for the next 140 years, by the way, I don't know that this podcast could very well be a fad. I know that people listen to podcasts today because I do. 10 years from now, will I be listening to podcasts? I have no idea. I guarantee you, if this is a fad, we're going to quit because it takes a lot of effort. But as long as people are listening to podcasts, we're going to be producing this because it's another way for people to connect with the gospel. I was so blessed when I heard from Elizabeth Anderson Lee, who listens to our podcast in Korea. And, if it's just for, hi, Elizabeth, if it's just for her and her family, it's worth doing at least until the fad is over. Okay, have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.